I remember when I was an undergraduate, maybe like a sophomore or something, my second year, and we went to, which I'm not sure what they called it, but I would assume that today they'd call it an anti-racism training. And I remember there, and it was a Filipino guy talking to us, and he was very animated and very into what he was doing. And some of what he said, I took in and I registered with, but a lot of it, I was just kind of very resistant and disconnected. I didn't feel like I was a part of it. And then unbeknownst to me still to this day, I don't know how this happened. I think I just applied to, when you mentioned earlier, applying to all sorts of places, and I was trying to get involved in the university and didn't really know what to do. And so I applied to all these different programs, and one of them I think was the Rural Human Services program. And I got a call one day, and they invited me, and I was up living in a Inupiaq town on the Arctic Ocean. And so the Rural Human Services program, what they'll do is they'll bring folks from rural Alaska, almost exclusively Alaska Native, but there's a few others that straggle in like me. And I went there, and at first I was the only non-Native person, and I was the only male. And that changed a little bit as we went on. There were a few more people that came in. But I went in there and I was like, wow, these folks are not going to want me in here. This is a different experience for me. And it was, they facilitated almost everything, all of the learning by talking circles. And it was a big group. So like 30 to 40 women were in there and me. And I remember the first talking circle that I was a part of, I was thinking, I've got so much other stuff to do, and people are talking for so long, and I felt like people are kind of whining and complaining, and I'm thinking, what does this have to do with me? And I think even I was one of the last ones, and when it came to me, I was just like, I don't know what to say. I'm hungry. Let's have lunch or something. And the thing that happened, though, was that over time, participating in the circles, for one, they were very gracious and hospitable to me and very welcoming, almost the opposite of what people might fear, like I said, that I feared might happen. But also was that when everybody is sharing stories and you're listening, and you can't help but listen if you're there for so long, but if you're bored, eventually you're going to pay attention because you're bored. And I became a part of it. And instead of it becoming like my story and these ladies' stories, it was our story, and they were intertwined. And I realized I played a part in it. And we became very, very well connected, and it planted the seed for, a transformation for me. And I realized everybody doesn't have that opportunity. And you mentioned, it's important to be connected and whatnot. And I think today we can be more connected than ever, right? We can have this podcast from Finland to Alaska, and I have students all over the globe as well. But on the other hand, oftentimes we don't know our own neighbors. And I think one of the negative things that I think is maybe unintentionally sprung out of like DEI or anti-racism is that there's a fear of getting to know what we deem the other, or that we're going to be wrong or this or that. And so it might prevent us or instill a fear in us to talk to somebody else or to get to know them. And so instead we use our imagination, and which is often wrong. And so I wonder, what do you think about how do we stay connected, or how do we get connected in this, futuristic world that's ever changing, and who knows what's coming tomorrow. But I think as social workers, especially, it's so important for us to stay connected, but it can be so difficult.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah. I think one of the things too is learning not to police each other necessarily. I mean, it's one thing if we disagree, or you want to express like why that hurts me, and we have to assume the other person has a good heart and wants to hear that as well. That's not always the case. But I think sometimes fear prevents us from connecting with each other. Fear of saying the wrong thing, and I think one of the next steps we have to take is, I found in those retreats with Dr. Yellowbird that one of the things was that people were able to, there was an atmosphere so people could open up and speak. And it doesn't just drop down. It is something you have to work on to create those trusting bonds. And definitely in those retreats, I learned a lot about people who maybe had very different backgrounds from me. But I think some of this connection means that we have to, try to overcome that fear of like talking to people who are very different than us. And of course, I say that like still fully recognizing that we're in a very hard world right now, that where people are throwing Nazi salutes and there's a lot of violence and it's not always wise to approach people who are trapped in these cycles of hatred. I fully recognize that. But I think, our hope has got to be in finding some way to discuss also with people who are not like us, or who maybe don't always have the same viewpoints, and to try to listen, because I do think, we talk a lot about polarization here and how how has the world become so polarized? How is it that we cannot speak? And I think the only way to start overcoming that is by speaking to one another, fully recognizing that there is a core of people that maybe that tactic is not going to work with. But I do think in person somehow, one of the legacies of the pandemic, has been that it's been hard to somehow get people back together, that there has been kind of a trauma through that pandemic for many people. And it's been difficult. I know even here in Finland, it's been hard to get people back in the classroom and back together. So I think being patient with one another, and finding ways to there are things that make us uncomfortable, but we still have to find ways to deal with that discomfort and connect with each other. I don't see hope unless we're able to somehow find ways of connecting, but it's difficult and it's deeply uncomfortable and it can be painful. And I'm not going to deny that. But yeah, and classrooms are wonderful. If people have that opportunity to discuss in groups, I think that's a great way. Even, I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction. And, I think some of the best writers right now are coming out of Ireland. There's some just wonderful novels coming out from rural Ireland about people. I just read a book about a young man and how his sense of feeling trapped in this rural. And I also felt like this really opens the world and made me very empathetic to young men who might be experiencing, these kinds of feelings and this kind of life situation. So also, novels are a great way to learn. You fall into someone else's story